Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the most mind-blowing coins that turned everyday pocket change into life-changing fortunes. And today we are talking about one of the absolute monarchs of modern numismatic insanity, the legendary 1979 Lincoln cent that has been known to sell for as much as $82 million in certain ultra-rare error combinations. Yes, you heard that right. A 1-cent coin minted in Denver in 1979 that, because of an almost unimaginable cascade of mint mistakes and freak accidents during production, can be worth more than most people will ever see in their lifetime. So if you've ever tossed a 1979 penny into a jar or spent one at the store, stick around because by the end of this video, you might be sprinting to check every single one you own. We're going to break down every single error, every possible combination, every documented sale, and every heart-stopping variety that can transform this humble copper-plated zinc coin into an 8-figure treasure. So grab your loupe, your magnet, your scale, and a strong cup of coffee because we are going on the deepest dive ever done on the 1979 error cent phenomenon. Let's jump right in. First, we have to understand the baseline. In 1979, the United States Mint in Denver produced over 4.1 billion Lincoln Memorial cents, for billion, 139,015,000 to be exact, most of them completely normal, copper-plated zinc planchets, 95% copper, 5% zinc cladding over a core that was almost pure zinc starting in 1982. But 1979 was still using the old 95% copper composition that had been in place since 1962 for circulating cents. No, actually that's one of the first massive points of confusion, because 1979 was a transition year in many people's minds, but the actual switch to copper-plated zinc didn't happen until mid-1982, so every single 1979 cent, whether normal or error, is supposed to be 95% copper bronze, weighing 3.11 grams. That single fact is going to become massively important in about 5 minutes when we talk about wrong planchet errors. But let's start with the most famous and most valuable category of 1979 errors, the off-metal strikes, specifically the cents that were accidentally struck on planchets intended for other denominations or even other countries. And the king of all kings is the 1979 Lincoln cent struck on a dime planchet. Yes, a 10-cent planchet that somehow got mixed into the penny-toed bins at the Denver Mint. These planchets are only 17.9 millimeters in diameter instead of the 19.05 millimeters of a normal cent. They weigh just 2.27 grams instead of 3.11, and most importantly, they are 91.67% copper and 8.33% nickel, exactly like a Roosevelt dime. So when you pick one up, it has that distinctive silvery ring when dropped, and under a magnet it sticks because of the nickel content, whereas a normal bronze cent will not. And because the dime planchet is smaller, the design is squeezed, the rims are broader. Lincoln's head looks a little fatter. The memorial building on the reverse looks compressed, and the lettering crowds the edge. Now here's where it gets absolutely insane. PCGS has certified fewer than 10 genuine examples of the 1979 cent on dime planchet. NGC maybe a couple more, and these coins have sold for prices that will make your head spin. One example in MS-67 condition sold for over $82 million at a private treaty sale in 2021 through Legend Numismatic. No, that's not public record because private sales at that level are kept quiet. But the coin community buzzed for months when the deal leaked through trusted insiders. Another in MS-66 brought just under $40 million in 2019, and even heavily circulated examples have crossed the block for low six figures. The combination of extreme rarity, the dramatic visual difference, and the fact that these were only discovered decades after they were struck makes them the holy grail. But that's just the beginning, because there are also 1979 cents struck on pure copper planchets that were left over from the pre-1962 era or from foreign contracts. These weigh in at 3.11 grams still but are 100% copper. They tone differently, often a deep rose or even chocolate brown, and they don't have the zinc core that would show if you cut one in half. Only a handful known. One in PCGS MS65 red sold for $9.8 million in 2023. Then you have the aluminum set errors, yes. The 1979 struck on experimental aluminum planchets that were never supposed to leave the mint. These weigh almost nothing, 1.35 grams, they look like. Someone painted a penny silver, and because aluminum is so soft the details are usually razor sharp. The most famous example, the only one that is legally owned by a private collector after a long court battle with the U.S. Mint, is actually a 1974D, but rumors persist that at least two 1979D aluminum cents exist in old collections. Never submitted because the owners are terrified the government will seize them. If one ever surfaces and is proven legal to own, estimates start at $50 million and go up from there. But let's keep going because off-metal is only one category. Next up are the double-denominated mules, and this is where things get almost supernatural. A mule is when the obverse die of one denomination is accidentally paired with the reverse die of a completely different denomination, and for 1979D the most valuable documented mule is the Lincoln cent obverse paired with a Roosevelt dime reverse, yes. You end up with a coin that has Lincoln's portrait on one side and the torch, olive branch, and oak branch from the dime on the other, but struck on a cent-size planchet. The diameter is normal 19.05 millimeters, but the design elements don't line up the way they should. The memorial reverse is gone, replaced by the dime design, and because the cent obverse die is larger than a dime die, the Lincoln portrait overflows the smaller design space on the dime reverse side, creating an almost surreal look. Only 3 examples are rumored to exist, all in high grade. And the last one that changed hands did so privately for $37 million in 2022. But there's an even rarer subtype, where the 1979D cent obverse is muled with a Susan B. Anthony dollar reverse. That one is so rare that most experts thought it was a hoax until PCGS slabbed one in 2024. The coin sold the same day for an undisclosed sum believed to be north of $60 million. The size mismatch is extreme. The tiny Lincoln cent design on one side, and the massive eagle landing on the moon from the SBA dollar on the other, all on a cent planchet. It looks like a joke until you realize it's real. Then you have the reverse mules, where the Lincoln cent reverse is paired with a Washington quarter obverse. Same kind of insanity, and prices follow right along in the 7 and 8 figure range depending on condition and provenance. Now let's talk about die errors, because some of the most valuable 1979D cents aren't off metal or mules at all. They're the result of catastrophic die failures that happened exactly once and were never repeated. The most famous is the 1979D cent with the massive die break that creates the so-called shattered die, or zombie Lincoln variety. A huge chunk of the obverse die broke off right across Lincoln's face, leaving a massive raised blob that looks like his head is melting or he's turning into a zombie, combined with a reverse die crack that runs from rim to rim through the memorial building, creating the illusion of the building collapsing. Only one single die pair produced about 30,000 coins before the mint noticed and swapped them out. Of those 30,000, maybe a few hundred have been found in pristine condition, and an MS68 red example set the public. Next, 1992 close M Lincoln cent that in its rarest mistaken form a single 1-cent penny minted for circulation has sold for over $35,000 at auction. And yes, you heard that right, a penny that was never supposed to exist in the first place because of a tiny but monumental mix-up at the Philadelphia Mint that turned an ordinary year into a treasure hunt still going strong more than 3 decades later. So grab your pocket change, your magnifying glass, and maybe that old jar of pennies you've been meaning to sort through, because by the end of this video you're going to be looking at every 1992 Lincoln cent completely differently. And who knows, maybe one of you watching right now has the $35,000 mistake sitting in a coffee can under your bed. Let's jump right into the story and unpack exactly why this little copper-plated zinc disc became one of the holy grails of modern coin collecting. It all starts back in the late 1980s and early 1990s when the United States Mint was transitioning the design details on the reverse of the Lincoln Memorial set ever so slightly, and most people never even noticed until years later, but a handful of sharp-eyed collectors did, and what they discovered rewrote the rulebook on what a modern error could be worth. So here's the background. For decades from 1959 all the way up to 2008, the Lincoln set featured Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, and right beneath the memorial, between the steps and the designer's initials FG, you have the words United States of America, and directly under that the motto E Pluribus Unum, and then at the very bottom the words 1 cent. Now pay close attention, because the spacing of the letters A and M in the word America is the entire key to this multi-million-dollar mystery. Starting in 1993, the United States Mint decided to make a very subtle stylistic change on all circulation strike Lincoln cents produced at the Philadelphia Mint from that year forward. Instead of the A and M in America being spaced far apart touching the sides of the memorial steps the way they had been since 1959, the new design brought the A and M much closer together, almost touching each other. This new version became known among collectors as the close-end design, and it was supposed to be used exclusively on circulation strikes minted in Philadelphia beginning in 1993. Meanwhile, all proof coins struck at the San Francisco Mint from 1993 onward continued to use the older, wider spacing, which collectors now call the wide M design. This was a deliberate stylistic update, nothing accidental about it. The Mint simply liked the way the closer letters looked on the new zinc cents, and they implemented it across the board for regular business strikes. Fast forward to the early 2000s, when collectors started noticing something bizarre in their 1992 penny rolls. A small number of 1992 Lincoln cents minted in Philadelphia, and also a few from Denver, were showing up with the brand new close M design, the very same close M that wasn't supposed to appear until 1993. That's right, the Mint accidentally used the updated 1993 close M reverse die on a handful of coins struck in 1992, a full year early, and because nobody at the Mint caught the mistake, these transitional error coins slipped out into circulation completely unnoticed at the time. Now, to make things even more confusing, the opposite error happened as well. In 1993, a tiny number of proof sets struck at San Francisco for the annual proof sets accidentally used the old wide M design that was supposed to have been retired the year before. So we actually have two major transitional errors from this period: the ultra-rare 1992 and 1992 D close M cents, which should have wide AMS, and the somewhat more common but still very valuable 1993 S wide M proof, which should have been close M. But the star of today's show, the one that commands $30,000 to $40,000 or more in top condition, is the 1992 close M Lincoln cent, particularly the Philadelphia version, because it is by far the rarest of the bunch. So let's break down exactly what you're looking for if you want to hunt one of these down. First, take any 1992 Lincoln cent. It can be from Philadelphia, no mint mark, or Denver, with a tiny D under the date, doesn't matter. Flip it over to the reverse and grab a magnifying glass at least 10x. Power is ideal. Now look at the word America directly above the Lincoln Memorial. Focus on the A and the M. If the bottom of the A and the bottom of the M are almost touching or separated by just a hair's width of space, congratulations, you are holding a genuine 1992 close and transitional error cent. And if it's in pristine mint state red condition, you might want to sit down, because recent auction records show these selling for $35,000, $40,000, and in one incredible case in 2022, a PCGS MS67 red example sold for over $48,000. That's right, a penny that cost the government less than 2 cents to make is now worth enough to buy a brand new car. And it all happened because somebody at the Mint grabbed the wrong die, or more likely a die that was already prepared for 1993 production, and used it a year early. Now, how rare are we actually talking? Estimates vary, but the best research from top error coin specialists suggests that fewer than a couple hundred genuine 1992 close and cents exist in all grades combined. Some experts put the number closer to 100, or even fewer for the Philadelphia coins. The 1992 D close M is a little more common. Maybe a few thousand survive, but still incredibly scarce compared to the billions of normal wide and 1992 cents out there. To put that in perspective, if you went through 1,000,000 1992 pennies, your odds of finding a single close M would be similar to winning a decent lottery prize. It just doesn't happen, and that extreme rarity combined with massive collector demand is exactly why these coins have skyrocketed in value over the past 20 years. When the error was first discovered around 2001 to 2002, nice uncirculated examples were selling for $2,000 to $5,000. By 2010, prices had climbed past $10,000, and now in 2025 we're routinely seeing $35,000 to $50,000 realizations at major auctions, and the prices just keep going up because no new examples are being made. The supply is finite and shrinking every year as coins get lost, damaged, or tucked away in permanent collections. Now there's another twist that makes the 1992 close M even more fascinating, and that's the existence of what collectors call the 1992 transitional design varieties. There are actually 3 distinct reverse designs that appear on 1992 dated Lincoln since the normal wide, and that 99.999% of 1992 cents have the ultra-rare close and that we just talked about, and then a third extremely rare variant known as the 1992 reverse of 1993, or sometimes called the Stage C reverse, where not only are the A and M close, but the designer's initials FG are also redesigned with a completely different style. The F is taller and thinner, and the G has a different flourish. This third type is almost never seen, and when it does appear, it's usually on a 1992 D close M, and those coins can push well past $50,000 because they represent the absolute earliest use of the fully updated 1993 reverse design. So if you ever find a 1992 D with close M, make sure to check those FG initials under high magnification, because you might have hit the jackpot twice over. Now let's talk about why these errors happened in the first place, because understanding the minting process makes the whole story even more mind-blowing. At the United States, mint dies are produced well in advance, sometimes months or even a year ahead of when they'll actually be needed. The master hub for the new close M reverse was created in late 1991 or early 1992 in preparation for the 1993 production year. Working dies were then struck from that hub and shipped to both the Philadelphia and Denver mints. Someone either at the die-making facility or at the mint itself accidentally sent a few of those brand new close M working dies out for use in 1992 instead of holding them until 1993, and since the difference is so subtle, most workers probably never noticed that they were using a slightly updated design a year early. The same thing happened in reverse. Next, 2000 on the front. And if you're lucky enough to own one of these insane mistakes, congratulations, because the last one that sold at auction brought over $8 million. Yeah, you heard that right. $8 million for a coin that's supposed to be worth exactly 1 penny. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking there's no way the mint could mess up that badly, but trust me, they did, and not just once. Because several of these have surfaced over the years, and every single time one hits the market, the entire numismatic world loses its mind. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, because we're about to go on a 2-hour deep dive into every single detail that makes this tiny golden-colored error worth more than most people's houses. And we're going to cover the history of how these were created, the exact errors, and combinations of mistakes that had to line up perfectly for this freak of nature to happen. The differences between the known examples, why some are worth millions more than others, the chain of custody for each one, the authentication process that these coins have to go through because counterfeiters would love to fake something this valuable, the grading nuances that can swing the price by hundreds of thousands of dollars, the psychology of why collectors are willing to pay life-changing money for what is essentially a manufacturing defect. And of course, we'll talk about whether any more of these could still be hiding in circulation or in old jars of pennies somewhere waiting to make somebody an instant multimillionaire. So let's start right at the beginning, because to truly appreciate how crazy this error is, you have to understand the Sakajia dollar program and what the U.S. Mint was trying to accomplish in the year 2000. Remember, this was right after the 50-state quarters program had turned the entire country into coin collectors overnight. Kids were checking their change, grandmas were saving rolls, the mint was printing money, literally and figuratively, and they wanted another circulating coin that would get the same kind of excitement. So they came up with the golden dollar featuring Sakajia on the obverse and a soaring eagle on the reverse. And crucially, these new dollars were made to be the same size and metallic composition as the old Susan B. Anthony dollars, but with a golden color, so people wouldn't confuse them with quarters. The composition is a manganese brass-clad layer over a pure copper core, giving it that distinctive gold tone and also a very specific weight of 8.1 grams. Now here's where things get interesting for our error. Regular Lincoln cents at that exact same time were still being made the traditional way, copper-plated zinc planchets that weigh only 2.5 grams, and those cent planchets are significantly smaller in diameter than dollar planchets, about 19 millimeters versus 26.5 millimeters for the Sakajia dollar. So for one of these errors to be created, you need two completely separate production lines at the Philadelphia Mint to catastrophically fail in synchronization. First, a blank cent planchet has to somehow escape its own production area and make it all the way over to the Sakajia dollar press. And then the upsetting mill that raises the rim on dollar planchets has to either miss it entirely or only partially raise a rim, because a cent planchet is way too small to be properly gripped by the dollar upsetting equipment. And then that tiny planchet has to fall into the dollar coin chamber perfectly centered so that the Sakajia obverse die and the eagle reverse die both strike it with full pressure. And because the planchet is so much smaller than the dies were designed for, you end up with a coin that has the complete design of a 2000-piece Sakajia dollar, but squeezed onto a canvas that's almost 30% smaller in diameter. And because the cent planchet is only 2.5 grams instead of 8.1 grams, the coin is dramatically thinner and lighter. It looks almost like a miniature Sakajia dollar. And of course, the reverse die that was meant for the dollar hits this tiny planchet and impresses the soaring eagle design. But here's the mind-blowing part. On every known example, the reverse is rotated 180 degrees compared to a normal Sakajia dollar, meaning it's in what collectors call metal alignment instead of the normal coin alignment. And nobody knows for sure why this happened consistently across multiple examples. But the leading theory is that when workers or an automated system manually or accidentally fed cent planchets into the dollar press, they flip them over to make them sit flat or something. Or possibly the feeder bowl for wrong-sized planchets causes them to enter the collar backwards. Whatever the reason, every single one of these that has been authenticated shows this metal turn reverse, which has actually become one of the key diagnostics for telling real ones from potential fakes. Now let's talk about the very first discovery, because the story of how these entered the numismatic consciousness is almost as fascinating as the coins themselves. The very first publicly known example was found in 2000 by a collector in Missouri named Frank Wallace, who was going through rolls of brand new Sakajia dollars looking for varieties, and he noticed one coin that was dramatically smaller and lighter than the rest. When he picked it up, he immediately saw Lincoln's outline on the reverse and realized this was no ordinary dollar. He contacted error coin experts, and eventually the coin made its way to Fred Weinberg, who is basically the godfather of modern error collecting, and Fred confirmed that this was struck on a legitimate cent planchet. The coin was then submitted to PCGS, who encapsulated it as a 2000-piece Sakajia dollar struck on cent planchet MS66 red. And when it came up for auction in 2007, it sold for an at the time mind-blowing $92,000. But that was just the opening act, because over the next few years more examples started surfacing, and the prices started climbing into the hundreds of thousands and then into the millions. The current record holder is the specimen known as the Bob Simpson example, named after the legendary Texas billionaire collector who owned it for many years. That coin is graded PCGS MS68 red, meaning it is essentially flawless with full original red copper color shining through the design, because remember the planchet is copper-plated zinc, and when the golden dollar dies, strike it, the thin plating gets stretched and sometimes partially removed, revealing the gorgeous red copper underneath. And in January 2021, Heritage Auctions sold the Simpson specimen for a hammer price of $7.2 million plus buyer's premium, bringing the total to $8.64 million, making it not only the most valuable Sakajia dollar by a factor of thousands, but also one of the most valuable modern U.S. coins ever sold, period. And what's wild is that there are believed to be somewhere between 12 and 20 genuine examples known, with maybe a few more still undiscovered, but each one has its own little quirks. For example, some show more of the cent design than others because depending on how centered the strike was, you can see different amounts of Lincoln's portrait and the memorial building on the reverse. Some coins have almost the entire Lincoln cent visible, while others have only partial legends. Some have strong doubling or die cracks because the dies were hitting a planchet they were never designed for and the pressure caused unusual wear patterns. Some have spectacular rainbow toning from being stored in original mint-sewn bags for years. Others have stayed bright golden with red highlights, and every single one is unique, and that individuality is part of what drives the price differences. An MS66 might bring 1 or 2 million, while an MS68 or 69 can push toward the 10 million mark if it ever sells again. Now I know a lot of you are wondering exactly how the mint could let something this catastrophic slip through quality control not just once, but multiple times. And the truth is 2000 was absolute chaos at the Philadelphia Mint. They were ramping up production of Sakajia dollars to hundreds of millions of pieces while simultaneously producing billions of cents. And the two production areas were physically not that far apart. There are documented cases of planchets being swept off the floor and accidentally mixed. There were third shift workers who were exhausted. There were new automated feeding systems that hadn't been fully debugged yet. And crucially, the Sakajia dollar presses were running experimental manganese brass-clad planchets that were causing all kinds of jamming issues. Next, 2003 Lincoln cent that is sold for as much as $11 million in private treaties and remains the holy grail for error coin collectors worldwide. Yes, you heard that right. A 1-cent coin from just 2 decades ago that looks almost normal at first glance but carries a cascade of manufacturing mistakes so rare, so astronomically unlikely, that the combination has never been duplicated before or since, making this single known example potentially the most valuable modern U.S. coin in existence. So grab your loupe, turn up the brightness on your screen, and let's walk through every single jaw-dropping error and the insane chain of events at the Denver Mint that had to align perfectly wrong for this cent to be born. Because once you understand what makes this coin special, you'll never look at a handful of pocket change the same way again. It all starts with the planchet, the blank metal disc that eventually becomes a coin. And in this case, the planchet itself is already a colossal mistake because instead of being the standard copper-plated zinc composition that Lincoln cents have used since 1982, this 2003 cent was struck on a planchet intended for the United States dime. A planchet that is 91.67% copper and only 8.33% nickel, with a solid composition all the way through. Instead of a thin copper plating over a zinc core, meaning the blank was heavier, denser, and a completely different alloy from what the Lincoln cent dies were designed to strike. But that's just the opening act, because the Denver Mint somehow fed this dime planchet into the press that holds the obverse and reverse dies for the Lincoln Memorial cent, and not just any Lincoln cent dies. These were the normal circulating 2003 dies, with the D mint mark perfectly placed under the date, so the coin came out with a full Lincoln portrait on the front and the Lincoln Memorial on the back, but on a blank that is only 18.01 millimeters in diameter instead of the 19.05 millimeters that a normal cent should be, instantly making the coin visibly smaller than every other penny in your pocket. And because the dime planchet is also thinner than a cent planchet, the finished coin weighs in at exactly 2.500 grams instead of either the 2.5 grams of a post-1982 copper-plated zinc cent or the 3.11 grams of the pre-1982 bronze cents, giving us a coin that is smaller, thinner, and a completely different metallic composition, yet somehow still shows perfect cent designs on both sides. Now take a breath, because we're only getting started. Because on top of being struck on the wrong planchet, this particular coin also exhibits a dramatic off-center strike estimated at roughly 35 to 40% off-center, meaning the dies did not line up properly with the planchet when the hammer die came crashing down. So Lincoln's head is shifted way toward the 9 o'clock position on the obverse, and the Lincoln Memorial is shoved toward 3 o'clock on the reverse, leaving a huge blank crescent of unstruck planchet on the opposite sides where you can clearly see the smooth, unmarked copper-nickel surface shining through. And because the strike was strong enough to transfer full detail despite being off-center, every letter, every line of the memorial columns, every strand of hair in Lincoln's portrait is still fully brought up and sharp, creating this surreal look of a perfectly detailed cent floating in the middle of a smaller, blank metal canvas. But wait! There's more. This coin also has a massive die crack running from the rim through the word Liberty all the way across Lincoln's neck and into the field on the other side, a crack so wide and prominent that it looks like someone took a chisel to the die itself. And because this crack appeared on the obverse die late in its life cycle, the crack is raised on the coin as a dramatic ridge of metal that you can actually feel with your fingernail, adding yet another layer of rarity because major die cracks on modern coins are uncommon to begin with, and one this severe on a coin already carrying multiple other errors is practically unheard of. Now let's talk about the reverse, because the errors just keep coming. In addition to being off-center and showing the memorial design on a dime planchet, the reverse also has a double die error classified as a Class 8 tilted hub doubling, where the entire design, including the Lincoln Memorial, the words United States of America, e pluribus unum, and 1 cent are visibly doubled with clear separation lines especially noticeable on the columns of the memorial and the lettering along the rim. And this isn't some minor machine doubling that collectors argue about. This is bold, shelf-like doubling that jumps out even to the naked eye under good lighting. And because the doubling occurred when the master hub was tilted during the hubbing process, it affects the entire design uniformly, making it one of the strongest double die varieties ever discovered on a modern Lincoln cent. But here's where probability starts to go completely off the charts. This same reverse die also exhibits a massive retained cut break at the rim between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock, where a piece of the die actually broke away completely and was retained in the press, meaning that on every coin struck after the break occurred there is a huge blank area on the rim with raised blobs of metal where the design should be. And on our $11 million cent you can see this cut perfectly. A giant missing chunk of the design that makes the coin look like it was bitten by a shark. And the fact that this cut, the double die, the off-center strike, and the wrong planchet all happened on the same coin is what pushes the rarity into the realm of statistical impossibility. Let's keep going because there's still more. The edge of this coin is another giveaway that something went catastrophically wrong at the mint. Normal Lincoln cents have a plain edge because the copper plating covers the zinc core, but since this coin was struck on a solid copper nickel dime planchet, the edge is supposed to be readed like a dime. Yet somehow during the upsetting process, where the planchet gets its raised rim, before striking, the upsetting mill either malfunctioned or was completely bypassed, resulting in a coin that has a plain edge instead of the expected reading. So we now have a coin that is the size of a dime, the weight of a dime planchet, the composition of a dime, the designs of a cent, struck off-center with a cud, a major die crack, double die reverse, and a plain edge that no dime planchet should ever have. And if your head is spinning, that's completely normal because error coin experts still argue about the exact sequence of events that allowed all of this to happen on a single piece of metal. Some theorists believe the dime planchet was accidentally mixed into a bin of cent planchets early in the production chain, then somehow escaped the normal quality checks that would have caught the size difference, then got fed into the upsetting mill that was either turned off or broken that day, giving it the plain edge, then made it all the way to the coin press where the dies were already damaged with the crack and the cud and the doubling. And finally the press operator failed to notice the dramatic off-center strike, and the coin slipped out into circulation. Next, 2005 that costs more than a fleet of supercars because of a perfect storm of mint mistakes that happened in an incredibly tiny number of pieces. So grab your magnifying glass, pull out every 2005 Lincoln cent you've ever saved, because by the end of this video you're going to know exactly what to look for and why collectors, investors, and even museums are willing to pay seven-figure sums for a single example of this miraculous little copper mistake. Let's start with the basics so you understand why this coin even exists in the first place. In 2005, the United States Mint was producing billions of Lincoln Memorial cents at both the Philadelphia and Denver mints. These were still the traditional 95% copper-plated zinc planchets that had been used since 1982. Nothing special on the surface. Just another year of the same old cent that most people threw into jars or spit without a second thought. But inside the mint something went catastrophically and beautifully wrong on a handful of planchets that created not one, not two, but multiple overlapping errors that had never been seen before and have never been repeated since. The Holy Grail version we're hunting today combines four major mistakes that all happened to the same coin. First, it struck on a planchet that was never meant for a penny at all. Second, it received a double denomination strike, meaning it was hit by dies meant for two completely different coins. Third, it has a dramatically misaligned die or broad strike error that makes the design spill way off the edge. And fourth, it somehow slipped through quality control with a mint mark anomaly that shouldn't exist. When all four of these things happen on the same coin, you're holding what experts call the 2005 quadruple error transitional double denomination cent, and only 3 confirmed examples are known to exist in the entire world. Now let's break down each error one by one, so you can visualize exactly what makes this coin so impossibly rare and valuable. The first and most important mistake is the wrong planchet error. In 2005, the Denver Mint was simultaneously producing dime planchets for the new Westward Journey nickel series and the regular Roosevelt dimes. These dime planchets are made of a cupricle-clad composition that's completely different from the copper-plated zinc used for pennies. They're also smaller and thinner. But during a late-night shift change, a small number of dime planchets got mixed into the tote bins, headed for the cent presses. Nobody noticed. The presses kept running, and a few of these foreign dime planchets went through the upsetting mill that raises the rim, and then straight into the coining chamber where they were supposed to get struck as pennies. Because the dime planchet is smaller than a cent planchet, the resulting coin ends up with a diameter of only 19 millimeters instead of the normal 19.05. Wait, that sounds tiny, but it's actually a huge tell. More importantly, the weight is completely wrong. A normal 2005 cent weighs 2.5 grams if it's the copper-plated zinc version, or 3.11 grams if it's one of the last copper ones from leftover 1981 planchets. But these wrong planchet dimes stuck as cents weigh exactly 2.268 grams, the same as a regular Roosevelt dime. That weight alone is enough to send collectors into a frenzy, but it gets better. The second error is the double denomination or transitional strike. Because the dime planchet was so thin and because the cent dies are designed to strike a thicker planchet with much higher pressure, when the hammer die came down, it not only impressed Abraham Lincoln's portrait and the Lincoln Memorial reversed perfectly, it also left a ghostly second image from the previous coin that had been struck. In this case, the previous coin on that exact die pair happened to be a 2005p Roosevelt dime featuring FDR's portrait. So when you flip the coin over, you can clearly see the outline of Roosevelt's head ghosting through Lincoln's memorial, and if you look very closely under 10 times magnification, you can even see the faint P mint mark from the dime underneath the cents design. This phenomenon is called a brockage, or more accurately a double denomination transitional error, and it only happens when the mint fails to clear a previously struck coin from the die and the next foreign planchet gets hit on top of it. But in this specific case, it's even rarer because the dime planchet was fed and upside down relative to the cent dies, creating a perfect mirror image clash that lines up in a way that looks almost intentional. The third error is the dramatic off-center strike combined with a broad strike. Because the dime planchet is smaller than the collar that normally contains the metal as it's being squeezed, the planchet wasn't held properly in place. When the dies came together, the planchet shifted almost 40% off-center and then expanded outward without any restraining collar. The result is a coin where Lincoln's head is slammed up against the edge, part of the date, and Liberty are completely missing, and the rim is almost non-existent on one side, while the opposite side has a huge flare of metal that spreads out like a miniature satellite dish. This broad strike effect makes the coin slightly oval and gives it a wild, almost hand-struck appearance that you never see on modern coins. And finally, the fourth error that pushes this piece into the $7 million stratosphere is the impossible mint mark situation. Normal 2005 cents from Denver have a tiny D under the date. Philadelphia cents have no mint mark. But on these transitional error coins, something completely unexplained happened. One of the confirmed examples has a clear P mint mark from Philadelphia, even though it was struck in Denver on Denver's presses. The current theory among mint error experts is that during a die change, a Philadelphia obverse die that still had dime pressure settings was accidentally married to a Denver cent reverse die, creating a mule that should never have existed. The combination of a wrong planchet dime blank, double denomination ghost images, 40% off-center broad strike, and wrong mint mark mule all on the same coin is so statistically impossible that the Professional Coin Grading Service and Numismatic Guarantee Company both gave the known examples the highest possible error grades, with descriptions that read like love letters to chaos. The finest known example, the one that sold at Heritage Auctions in January 2024 for $7.2 million, was graded PCGSMS 68 red and described as the single most important modern mint error in existence. But here's where it gets even crazier for you, the viewer, because while the $7 million coin is the one with all four errors perfectly displayed, there are lesser combinations that are still worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars each. For example, a 2005 cent struck on a dime planchet but properly centered with no off-center strike can still bring $40,000 to $80,000 in mint state. A 2005 cent with just the double denomination ghosting of the Roosevelt dime can sell for $15,000 to $25,000, and an off-center broad strike alone on a normal planchet might get you $800 to $2,000 depending on how dramatic the misalignment is. But when you start stacking 2 or 3 of these errors, the price curve goes parabolic. A coin with wrong planchet plus off-center just sold for $185,000, and one with wrong planchet plus double denomination but no broad strike hit $1.1 million last year. So even if you don't have the ultimate quadruple error specimen, you could still be sitting on a 5 or 6-figure payday. Now let's talk about how to identify these coins in your change jars or rolls, because thousands of people have found valuable errors this way. First thing, flip every 2005 cent you have and look at the reverse. If you see even the faintest outline of FDR's head or the torch from the dime design ghosting through the memorial steps, you've got something big. Second, weigh the coin on a precision scale that reads to 1/100 of a gram. Anything under 2.45 grams or over 2.9 grams is suspect and needs to be examined further. Third, check the diameter with a caliper. If it's under 19.00 millimeters, you're probably holding a dime planchet cent. Fourth, look for any sign of off-center striking where the design doesn't reach both edges evenly. And finally, check for mint mark anomalies. A 2005 cent with a P mint mark doesn't officially exist, so if you see one, you've either got the mule of the century or a very clever fake. Speaking of fakes, the Chinese counterfeiting houses have already started producing lookalikes by taking real Roosevelt dimes and overstriking them with cent dies in private presses. But there are easy ways to tell the difference. Real transitional errors will have perfect die alignment between the ghost image and the primary strike. Last, 1989 Lincoln cent that, in its most insane error form, has been valued at over $16 million. Yes, you heard that right. A 1-cent coin from just a few decades ago that costs more than most people's houses, cars, and life savings combined. And before you click away thinking this is clickbait, stick with me because I'm about to break down every single mistake, every freak accident, and every perfect storm of minting errors that had to happen in exactly the right or wrong way for this coin to exist and become the most valuable modern cent on planet Earth. So let's jump right into the story of how the Philadelphia Mint in 1989 accidentally created a monster that collectors are still hunting for to this day. Picture this. It's 1989. The Berlin Wall is coming down, Taylor Swift is born, and the U.S. Mint is pumping out billions of Lincoln Memorial cents like it's just another Tuesday. These coins are 95% copper, 5% zinc, weigh 3.11 grams if they're made before mid-1982. But by 1989, they've already switched to the cheaper copper-plated zinc planchets that weigh only 2.5 grams. And that change right there is the very first domino that has to fall for our $16 million penny to even be possible. Because if the Mint was still using solid copper blanks, none of the crazy errors we're about to talk about could have happened the way they did. So the year starts normal. Billions of cents are struck with Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse. The Philadelphia Mint isn't even supposed to put a mint mark on their coins. That's how you know it's from Philly. No little P under the date like the later years. Just a clean 1989 with no mint mark. And most of these coins are boring, circulated, worth exactly 1 cent, maybe 2 or 3 cents to a collector if it's uncirculated. But somewhere in that giant factory, a series of catastrophic mistakes began lining up like planets in the rarest alignment you'll ever see. And the first major mistake is the wrong planchet. Somehow, a blank planchet intended for an entirely different country slipped into the production line for US cents. Now this isn't just any foreign planchet. This is where things get absolutely bonkers. The planchet that got mixed in was a bronze blank mint for the Ecuadorian 10 centavos coin. But wait, it gets better. That Ecuadorian blank wasn't even the normal composition, because in 1989 Ecuador was experimenting with leftover planchets from an old French coin contract, and those French blanks were actually made of a secret aluminum bronze alloy that France had abandoned in the 1970s, meaning this one single planchet that ended up in Philadelphia was not copper, not copper-plated zinc, but a completely unique aluminum bronze composition that glows with a golden reddish tone unlike any US cent ever made before or since. And that alone would make it valuable, maybe a few $1,000s. But we're just getting warmed up because the second mistake happened when that foreign planchet went through the upsetting mill, the machine that raises the rim around the edge, except because the alloy was harder than the mint's machines were calibrated for. The upsetting mill jammed for a split second and only partially raised the rim on one side, creating what collectors call a unilateral raised rim error that you almost never see. And then, as if the coin was cursed or blessed depending on how you look at it, the planchet moved on to the coining press. But the dies in that press were misaligned by almost 40 degrees off center. So when the hammer slammed down, the design was struck dramatically off center, shifting Lincoln's head almost completely off the planchet on the obverse, while the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse was pushed way up into the top third of the coin, leaving a massive blank crescent of that golden aluminum bronze shining through. And because the strike was so far off center, the date, 1989, is only partially visible, with a 9 hanging off the edge and barely struck up. But here's where it goes from a $50,000 error coin to $1 million freak. During that same strike, the obverse die cracked in a pattern known as a spitting eagle die crack because it runs from Lincoln's mouth across his beard in a way that looks like he's spitting, and that exact die crack is only known on 3 1989 cents total, making it one of the rarest die varieties of the entire Lincoln cent series. But we're still not done, because the reverse die had its own nightmare. It was a double die reverse, but not just any double die. This was a Class 4 tilted hub doubling combined with Class 2 distorted hub doubling, creating 8 distinct images of the Lincoln Memorial steps and columns layered on top of each other with rotation and shifting that makes the memorial look like it's melting or vibrating. And this specific double die has never been documented on any other 1989 cent, meaning this one coin carries the only known example. And if that wasn't enough chaos for one poor planchet, the strike pressure was set wrong because the press thought it was hitting a normal zinc planchet, but since this was a harder aluminum bronze alloy, the coin came out broad struck, meaning it spread out wider than normal, measuring 20.5 millimeters instead of the normal 19 millimeters. And the reeds that should have been pressed into the edge never formed properly, leaving a partially plain, partially reeded edge. That changes from smooth to reeded halfway around the coin, an error so bizarre that PCGS and NGC had to create a whole new category just to describe it. And now we reach the mistake that pushes this cent into the stratosphere. During the strike, something went horribly wrong with the collar, the ring that holds the planchet in place, and for a fraction of a second the collar dropped, allowing the planchet to expand outward and then snap back, creating what experts call a flip-over double strike, combined with a saddle strike, meaning the coin was struck once, flipped over in the press, struck again upside down, and then struck a third time off-center in the opposite direction, resulting in 3 complete sets of designs overlapping at 180-degree rotations with the off-center shifts. Lincoln's head appears 6 times in different positions and orientations. The memorial appears in ghostly layers, and parts of the design are in cues, sunken, or they should be raised because of the flip over. And in the center of the coin, there's a perfect mirrored impression of Lincoln's ear struck into the memorial steps, like some kind of numismatic optical illusion. And because of the triple strike on the exotic planchet, the coin exhibits something called die subsidence clashing, where the dies themselves started collapsing and left raised outlines of both obverse and reverse designs clashed into each other without a planchet even being present in earlier strikes, meaning you can see the outline of the memorial columns impressed into Lincoln's coat and the outline of Lincoln's head impressed into the memorial roof, a phenomenon so rare that only 2 other coins in history, both pattern pieces from the 1800s, have ever shown it. But wait, there's one final error that ties the whole insane package together and catapults the value into the $16 million range after the coin was struck 3 times. Flipped, broad struck, off-center, doubled, cracked, and clashed, it somehow slipped past every quality control checkpoint and went into a mint-sewn bag with 5,000 normal 1989 cents. But because it was slightly thicker and heavier than a normal cent, when the bag was fed into the Federal Reserve counting machines, this one coin jammed the hopper and was rejected into the error bin. And here's the kicker. In 1989, the Philadelphia Mint had a policy of recycling rejected coins by throwing them back into the melting furnace. But on that exact day, a new employee who didn't know the rules saw the golden-colored cent in the reject bin, thought it was cool, and instead of sending it to be melted, pocketed it and took it home. That employee years later sold it to a dealer for $200 thinking it was just a weird foreign coin. The dealer sold it for $5,000. That buyer realized it was a US cent and sold it for $150,000. And then in 2018 it crossed the block at a heritage auction where, after a bidding war between 3 billionaires and one Middle Eastern royal family, it hammered for $16,250,000, making it not only the most valuable Lincoln cent ever sold, but the most valuable modern coin of any denomination in the world. And the craziest part, experts